Hi again, everyone. So we are here with Grandmaster Wojciech Moranda. We are doing some bonus material. These puzzles are not in his Chessable course, but they're of the spirit of his Chessable course. So he sent me a couple extra puzzles where we can take a look and see his calculation method in action. So we're starting with one between Pechac and Leenhouts. And one thing I noticed in Wojciech's course is it's a lot of recent games. It's not like puzzles that you've seen 1,000 times from classic books and courses and so on. It's a lot of fresh material. And this one is black to move. So if you'd like to pause your video and take a few minutes and try to work through this, by all means you can. But I'm ready to dig in. Wojciech, anything that you'd like to add before we just start tackling this puzzle?
Not really. I'm also ready to dive right into it. Just wanted to say that it's also one of my golden rules of publishing that I always try to provide like the latest material available, just because I know like the disappointing feeling of buying a book and actually knowing 50% at least of the puzzles included in it. So, well, when you buy my courses or books, the probability that you're gonna know anything from you have ever seen any puzzles contained therein before, they're close to nil. And this is also a relatively new game from a student of mine who was black in this game, and it's an exercise that constitutes puzzle number 1 from the respective puzzle set, meaning that it pertains to vision and perceptivity. So it's black to play, and it's your turn to speak and give it a try.
Okay. So, yeah, one quick thing to add is it's funny that happens with these familiar puzzles because there's more chess positions than ever before in terms of like mining the mega database and mining the LiChess databases, and you've got the puzzle trainers and so on and so forth. So there's so much fresh material available. But I guess they're also everyone's got a lot of people have the classics ingrained and maybe can't help but go to them from time to time. But so I did take a quick look at this yesterday, Wojciech. So I'll tell you some of the first things I noticed, and you can tell me if there's anything, and then we'll get to obviously concrete variations, but you can tell me if there's anything that I'm any major omissions. So obviously this is the kind of position that I, as a 40-something, working adult, and I think a lot of listeners might struggle with, where there's a lot of loose pieces. We've got the bishop on b7 is unguarded. Of course, the rook is under attack. And then you notice that white has some vulnerabilities as well. Obviously, black has kind of an attacking posture here with the rook on the open half of, well, it's not an open file, but it's open for practical purposes with the rook here on g6 bearing down on the g2 pawn and the b7 bishop exerting some hidden pressure on it. So, of course, the first thing I look at is ideas of stuff like rook takes g2. One other point that I noticed quickly when I was looking at this is, of course, this rook on d1 is slightly vulnerable if we can deflect this rook from g1, but that's kind of it's not as exciting as it might be when we've got our own pieces hanging, So, for example, rook takes g2, even if we ignore king takes g2 for a second, which is also a line that must be calculated, but rook takes g2, queen takes rook is not as exciting if they're going queen takes bishop. And it was rook takes g2 moves that I keyed on first. So when you play rook takes g2, Wojciech, do you have any advice for which reply you would calculate first as white between rook takes and king takes?
Well, in this specific situation, I think that my first instinctive reaction would be to avoid taking with the king as much as possible, since this virtually jeopardizes us to all sorts of discovered checks, including even a discovered double check when you think about it. Rook takes g2, king takes g2, rook e2 check. Then again, the general rule of chess calculation says that if there are two candidate moves available, well, you're going to have to examine both of them. I think that we typically try to begin with the ones that are either more forcing in nature, or maybe the ones that we can confirm or reject quicker, right? So in this case, I think that after rook takes g2, rook takes g2, queen takes d1, despite, as you mentioned, the bishop of black hanging on b7, the same applies to the bishop of white on d3. So after rook takes g2, queen takes d1, queen takes b7, queen takes d3, well, all of a sudden I would be pretty satisfied with black's position because, well, I've managed to a certain degree at least, neutralize white's material edge. But also, if anybody would be attacking in this position afterwards. I mean, it could even be black after after the capture on d3 now, rook e2, trying to weaken the king of white. Also, once the rook is eliminated, no, rook e2 as black as an idea, right? As an
Right.
idea.
Okay.
And also, once the rooks disappear from the board, the queen and knight duo is going to represent an awfully tactical and therefore dangerous kind of pair of pieces. What I have in mind is like this knight d4 jump, obviously, but only when the rooks disappear from the board. But coming back to your question, naturally, once I reject rook takes g2, inevitably I'm going to have to also check king takes g2, as much as I do like the sheer idea of have to expose myself as white to a double check like this. But sometimes, like you simply have to check things like that, and if it's okay, actually you can play this even if it looks ugly. And this is one of those situations in which many amateur players are prone to committing mistakes, because many of them just reject moves based on appearances. They look at this position and say, no, if there's one thing that I'm not going to do as white out here, it's exactly capturing with the rook because of that aforementioned double check. Then again, if you start examining all of those moves of black, like rook e2 check, rook takes f4 check, knight takes f4, etc., you're quickly going to understand that white has nothing to fear. And as far as I remember, this is, by the way, what happened in the game. Rook takes g2, white simply took with the king. They made a couple more moves before black's momentary kind of a compensation got completely extinguished, right? I need to definitely praise you for indicating that this opportunity is possible, that it needs to be considered. So if a relatively strong grandmaster as black managed to went for this in a game, you are in good company by all standards, right? Even if rook takes g2 is not the best of moves. Then again, if you feel that if you kind of manage to if you that this is not the way to go, you need to come back to square one, and you need to look for other candidate moves, right? Sometimes, okay, I do advocate, when working with my students, that they carry out this whole process on a step-by-step basis. So first the eval, then a list of candidate moves, comparison, elimination, forced lines, blah blah blah. But sometimes, in order to understand that there is a move that needs to be played, you're going to have to rule out everything else. You're going to need to get desperate enough, right, in order to understand that while you're in a precarious situation, actually everything that looks reasonable, it doesn't work. So you need to come back to square one, and you need to broaden the spectrum of the moves that you consider out of sheer desperation. Right? Then again, if I were you in this situation, I would be looking for some light at the end of the tunnel, some element of hope. What could I possibly do to my opponent, even assuming that, well, he's gonna be taking my rook on e4 in a second from now? Because if you run anywhere, bishop f5 may be lethal for yourself. Bishop takes f5, I mean. Also, if you do nothing, well, he's 2 pawns up as far as I can tell. So this also sounds really bad. So any other kind of moves maybe that come into consideration for yourself?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the point you highlighted, obviously, about two pawns being 2 pawns down, and not to mention all the material that is under attack. You're probably not going to be able, for example, you can't just move the rook and guard the bishop, even if you did want to grovel, as they say, and attempt to hold on or fight on 2 pawns down. So yeah, I mean, what stands out, of course, Wojciech, is that your most powerful piece right now is not participating in the attack. And as we just talked about in the podcast we recorded, in terms of evaluating statics and dynamics, with you being down 2 pawns, you certainly want to go for dynamics. So that would suggest to me 2 queen moves, potentially either queen takes a2 or queen back to c6, eyeing this g2 square. And queen takes a2, unfortunately, while it does grab a pawn, I would quickly be concerned that white can just go rook to d2 and all of our problems persist. We picked up a pawn, but once we move our queen away, white still is going to have this pleasant choice between taking our bishop and taking our rook. And I probably would go for the rook. I mean, the white.
Sorry for interrupting. What I wanted just to say is that that's been a fantastic performance of yours so far for 2 reasons. First of all, I don't know if you've noticed this, but you've just evaluated the position essentially by saying, well, if I do nothing, I lose. And this immediately steered your thinking process into looking for active counterplay. And also, as a result, you have elected 2 candidate moves which look very much the same, like queen takes a2. and instantaneously you also figured out the difference between them. Namely, queen takes a2 can always be interfered with by means of rook d2, and white defends, gains a tempo on your queen, and also covers g2, the soft spot in his camp, twice. And finally, this way, you've managed to, as I said previously in the podcast, to separate the wheat from the chaff, to understand that if anything helps you out here as black, it's exactly going to be queen c6. But could you please explain to our viewers a little bit, in a little bit more detail, like why is exactly queen c6 so strong in this position? What are you targeting out here?
Sure, yeah. So we're targeting the aforementioned G2 vulnerability, forming a battery. Also, we are saving our bishop, so at least we have one thing less en prise. Obviously, the primary move to evaluate in reply to queen c6, because if we play queen c6, basically, if we got to move again, the primary move, I mean, we still might have rook takes g2 ideas straight away, but we also have rook e2, and suddenly we just have an army of attackers on g2, and white's not going to be able handle them all. So the primary moves, I think if, again, white could take the rook, but after queen takes, we've got three attackers on the g2 square. White's queen is totally offsides. White's queen is not going to be able to help with the defense. So the primary move to look at in that situation would be rook to d2. And the thing about rook to d2 is that shields the defense of the f4 square. So suddenly now our knight can come flying in. Right now we have two attackers on f4, and white has two defenders with the queen and the bishop. But if the rook were to come to d2 again, so for viewers, I don't know if I should be playing through the moves or not, but queen c6, and then if bishop takes rook, queen takes rook, rook d2, I would think knight takes f4 is pretty much lights out. But there is one other move to look at after queen c6 if white begins to look for counterattacks. Anything to add before I go on, Wojciech?
I just wanted to say that that was a fantastic piece of analysis so far. So after queen c6, taking on e4 is actually quite dangerous, since the pressure against g2 is only mounting. And also, what you touched upon along the way is this kind of discussion about the static and dynamic material balance, because you said that, well, white is heavily up on the material in a position like this. However, his bishop is stuck and the queen of his is completely out of play, whereas all of the black pieces are actively participating in the attack and targeting the weakest, the softest spot in white's camp, that is the g2 pawn. The only thing that I would like to hear from you, because, well, it takes two to tango, as they say, meaning that white doesn't need to take on e4 right away, but if he doesn't, he's going to be subjected to all of those, ideas like rook e2, as you've mentioned before. However, because your score, in my personal opinion, is like 100%, like a solid 100% so far for what you've said until this point of time. But the last thing that I would ask my students in the training session would be to evaluate the position arising after bishop takes e4 now, queen takes e4, rook d2, knight takes f4. We could actually make those moves on the board for the convenience of our users. And despite it being white to play, I like you to, more or less based on intuition, because you've calculated so far ahead already, intuitively to evaluate this position. You said lights out. As far as I know English, it means that you say that you're winning out here as black, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Fantastic, very good. That's also the correct eval. It's not only about knight takes g2 out here, because white can still try to defend, more or less trying to, whistle past the graveyard a little bit. But in some positions, even knight takes h3 is going to be strongly coming into consideration. It's all about opening up that h1 a8 diagonal. So the beauty of the cooperation along the light squares, specifically speaking, of the black squares, of the black pieces, is just striking out here, and white is totally defenseless. What is for me particularly telling out here is how white turned from the predator into the prey out here, despite still being heavily up in terms of material. Fantastic job, 100% score. Well done.
Thank you. So actually, yeah, I did I will say I called this a little too early. So if white plays something like rook to f2 here in this position, our best reply, we should take on h3, I would think, as you mentioned.
I think so, because after g takes h3, takes on g1, takes on g1, queen h1 is mate, as far as I can tell. While if he takes with the king, we've got something even simpler, queen g4, king h, queen h4 mate. At the same time, he cannot possibly ignore the knight on h3. He cannot generate any counter threat against our king, meaning that he's toast.
Okay, excellent. So, returning to the queen c6 position, we've now more thoroughly ruled out bishop takes e4. Again, I don't see any way for the white queen to even attempt to defend. Rook d2, as we mentioned, cuts off whether you take the rook or not. It's cutting off the defense of the f4 pawn. So that leaves attempts of counterattacks by white. So the last thing, or the most concerning thing I would then be evaluating, is what if white plays a move like b5?
And that's a very, very good remark of yours. On the other hand, why do I, within my Chessable course, why do I emphasize the need for this logical link between the eval of the position and the candidate move selection process? Because, well, you need to be guided by an idea when deciding in favor of a move or another one within the calculation process. If you stick to the idea and you kind of understand why are you going for a move in the first place, you are certainly going to reach your end destination, within the variation that you're calculating. So if I were to suggest a response to b5, I would kind of advise you to make sure that the queen of yours stays universally along the h1a diagonal, and all of a sudden everything becomes super, super.
Right. Yeah. There's no other way. Obviously, we can't access the C2 square. Like after takes, we can't get to C2. So if we want to keep our opponent under pressure, there's no other active square for the queen accomplishing nearly as much. So that sort of forces us. And I've noticed I'm susceptible to this, but I've noticed a lot of, we were talking in the podcast about a desire for heuristics. We all want shortcuts in life. So I've noticed a lot of adults, like they're as weaker players will dismiss out of hand a move that puts your piece in the line of fire. Stronger players might have something like Sam Shanklin's rule in mind, where they ask themselves, what if I do it anyway? What if I play this move that might not, fit all the circumstances that I would ideally like it to have, but has enough of them where I have to try to make it work. So that would leave me looking at queen d5 and systematically evaluating the discoveries that white has in return.
And not much had changed on the board. Actually, bishop e4 is still to no avail. And as mentioned previously, there's also this kind of a moment where we need to agree that we need to stop calculating. So if I were black and I would have spotted queen c6, I would have verified the consequences of bishop takes e4, which are good for black. And also I would be thinking about some counter candidates for white in form of b5, like trying to throw a spanner into my works, like damage my coordination if possible. But if I see queen d5 incoming, as much as I feel a little bit kind of uncomfortable with this side, as you said, some discoveries available, the rook of ours on e4 being on pre all this time, well, if the lines work, even the ugliest of positions is going to be okay, whereas we saw the rewards that we can reap at the end of those lines if only we manage to get our hands on g2, if we manage to plant a knight on f4. So as much as the position still remains, objectively speaking, tense, double-edged, I wouldn't hesitate before going as black into a position like this. Also because we had no other choice previously.
Right. Yeah. Sheer desperation. But to me, the most testing reply, the move I would be concerned with, and if I were playing an OTB game, maybe I would have tried to work it out in advance, or maybe, as you just described, I would have had the thought process where, well, I'm down 2 pawns and clearly I have nothing better. So I might as well put my opponent to the test. But bishop c2 is I don't see an immediate win for black. Where would we go from here, Wojciech?
Well, this is exactly the type of moment when I would be restarting my calculation process again, because I did mention this in the podcast that what I try to do, I try to calculate in chunks instead of 5, 6, 7 moves ahead, because the vision of ours can get hazy if the lines are a little bit too long. So here I would have reached queen d5, the position in my calculations. I would have made this intuitive decision that okay, it looks good, and if the opponent plays bishop c2 or just about any other move, since believe it or not, before bishop c2 the position becomes non-forcing again to a certain degree, well, I would have started thinking again, maybe I'm going to do knight d4 followed by rook e2. Maybe knight d4 will introduce some additional ideas for us based on knight f3 in the near future. Who knows? I mean, this is definitely going to be the moment when I start calculating once again. And also, I don't think that any player in the world should try to consider, when thinking about queen c6 in the first place, should be even trying to calculate beyond that point. because of so many candidate moves available for white at this point of time. Sometimes it simply doesn't make sense to calculate beyond a certain point. So I did mention this in the course already, that sometimes prowess and calculation is not about being able to calculate as far as possible, but rather knowing when to stop. And that would be my moment when I would be stopping after queen d5, at least provisionally for the time being, before the game continues and my opponent plays another move. Yeah?
It's good to hear you say that, because I always feel like that's one thing I've noticed in talking and working with grandmasters, is that you feel like they're just like infinite. You know, they can just calculate infinitely. So it is good to realize, to have in mind that it's okay to stop at some point, even with, you know, and accepting the uncertainty that might come along with a position. But as you pointed out, with the broader knowledge that if nothing else, this is our least bad option. And probably more than that. I mean, things are looking pretty promising. Okay, anything else on this one, Wojciech?
Well, I think that's that, I don't know, like from my side is just about everything. Obviously, I started noticing some other moves along the way, like bishop b3 after knight d4, but I didn't want to ruin the good impression that I hopefully made, previously on the viewers, right? Here it's kind of dangerous because, well, that's a skewer, and if the queen moves, it's queen g8. But as mentioned, I didn't go too deeply into this position. Now I see knight f3 ideas as well. It's like very, very tense, and who knows what is it going to escalate into. But okay, let's leave it maybe to the viewers. If somebody is curious, then we definitely encourage some further self-study on this one.
Okay, yeah, and I'll link to either a LiChess study or like a shareable chess base file with the position for anyone who wants to dig deeper.
That's
and
a great idea.
Okay, and as we wrap up, Wojciech, so I wanted to show one more position that you sent. This one, I don't know if we should give it a comprehensive treatment, but the answer, as I briefly mentioned to you in email, was so cool that I felt like we should at least expose our listeners to it. So this one is Jacobson Aravindh from 2023 in Spain. And how do you want to handle this? I mean, I guess listeners could definitely pause their videos. Anything else to say before we reveal the amazing answer to this one?
Well, you're down on materials, so you're gonna have to you either create some mating threats which are gonna turn out to be successful at the end of the day, or maybe you're gonna find yourself outplayed. And this kind of pretty much sums it up. The rest of the exercise is actually about indicating at least 2-3 candidate moves which match the description, so to speak, right? So moves that create some mating threats, maybe some threats, overall general threats against the king of white. Then again, vision is also like a skill that is going to be necessary in order. Like a healthy dose of vision might help, Black, the solvers, the viewers of ours, solve this exercise. But as far as I know, you handled it like a pro, right?
I didn't. I mean, I didn't get this one. I have to admit.
I got the impression that you mentioned Queen B3 and it was like that you found the solution.
Eventually, yeah. So, but I didn't. I only spent about 5 minutes on it, and eventually, I gave up. Yeah, I predominantly, and again, I think this is, my weaknesses are probably, I'm not alone in having them. Yeah, it's hard to look at these invisible moves, and knight takes d3 is so enticing just to get that key defender off the board and access the b2 square, that I sort of tend to fall into a thought pattern where you just kind of keep trying to fit that round peg and square peg into a round hole, they say in English. You just keep trying to jam it in there, and it's just, the attack isn't working.
Exactly.
Because the knight can come back, and suddenly white has improved their pieces, and we just, like, this bishop is just hopelessly out of play, and we don't really have a follow-up here.
Well, I'm not entirely sure whether I would be doing it that way, because as white, I think it's like mandatory to block the b file as quickly as possible. So after knight takes d3, I'd rather kind of secure my king by exactly returning a huge chunk of material by means of knight b5. Right?
Oh, wow.
This queen takes d3 move, I find it to be like a little bit cooperative from white side. I'm not so sure whether it's the end of the variation, since, like from the top of my head, I can mention rook b4, rook d4 as an idea. Yeah, and on the one hand, the pressure is still on, the king is exposed, but maybe we can leave this, to the viewers, right? We didn't want to ruin the fun, since as far as I can tell, you're also going to be providing the PGN. I don't know if I understood you correctly.
Yeah,
some of those puzzles, they might want to use for their training purposes, and we do not want to ruin all the fun for them. So in any case, knight takes d3 is not the move because of knight b5. Queen takes d3, I'm not so sure what I would be playing like this. However, like a move that caught my attention for starters was knight b3. Knight b3 when I was giving this exercise and try. And there's like yet another reason why this move fails to do the trick. Again, like we're not going to be ruining the fun for the viewers. It's just a question of whether you want to reveal like the move, or maybe are we going to stop at that? That we just say that what doesn't work and we're going to let them do the other.
Well, unless I edit it out, you already let the move slip, so I think we can reveal it.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So yeah, the answer, which again, I didn't get this, but I was amazed when I found it, is Queen B3. So take it away, Wojciech.
It's a so-called invisible move, meaning that the human mind finds it very difficult to even accept its mere existence because, well, we are taught from our early years not to put pieces on pre, yet alone, like a whole queen. Then again, if white takes on b3, after knight takes b3, it's instant mate. Quite a lovely one, by the way. It feels as if the white king was being thrown under the bus out here along the c-file. Whereas if white refrains from the materialistic approach of chopping on b3, essentially that's a full-scale invasion of the position of the white king. So eventually, well, white is going to have to pay the piper, I'm afraid. But again, I revealed the move, but maybe the viewers of yours will want to confirm this separately on their own. I'd prefer not to ruin the fun, at least not too much for them, since I've already accidentally revealed the move.
Okay. Yeah, so we will leave it there. I will just point out, obviously, that the queen can't be taken and the knight is under attack, and white can potentially trade knights, but then black has their own potential replies. So there's a lot to work out, and I will link to this in a LiChess study, as well as a few other puzzles that Wojciech sent that are not in his excellent Chessable course, Calculate Like a Beast. So thank you, Wojciech, for the free lesson. Anything to add before we wrap up this video?
Thank you very much as well. I'm very grateful to you for this possibility to record a podcast together to solve some puzzles as well. Thank you very much to the viewers for listening to us, and hopefully you're going to find this special bonus set very entertaining. As mentioned, the course titled Calculate Like a Beast is available for sale on Chessable. There's going to be a bonus chapter available in a short while from now, if I'm lucky, maybe in a month from now. So stay tuned. If you ever happen to have any questions pertaining to the course, please do not hesitate to ask me via the platform. Otherwise, once again, thank you very much for listening to us, and hope you have a good day.
Thanks. Yeah. And of course, if listeners buy the course and the supplemental chapter is completed, it will automatically be added. They don't have to wait for it, right?
Naturally, yes. It's also if you pay the base price, as far as I understood, it's obviously like an addition, like a bonus. For me personally, it serves like a token of gratitude to the customers who trusted in the quality of the work that I provide and decided to enhance their calculation skills exactly based on my course. So there's going to be a separate announcement on the platform, as far as I can tell, in a while from now. So we cannot possibly miss it. Maybe if we're lucky, there may be also some kind of special offer connected there too. But let's see how things go in a month or now from so, right? So yeah, until then. Yeah, like I'm open to answering your questions everybody's questions via the platform, obviously.
Okay. Sounds like you've got a course to get to work on, Wojciech. So we'll leave it there. Thanks again.
Thank you once again, too.